I'm very pleased to welcome Lola, the cat from Grandma's house, and the orange tabbies are here, and also Molly from West Sussex, a rescue cat. So we're very pleased to welcome both audience and cats. And before I hand over to David to introduce his topic and his talk, I'd also like to just welcome Sandra Edis from the Nottingham City Library Service, because we run these sessions in partnership and association with Nottingham Libraries. So Sandra, would you just like to say a few words?
I would, thank you, Rick. Hi everybody. I'm Sandra. I work for Nottingham City Libraries, and we're really pleased to be supporting the festival. Unfortunately, you're coming from my dining room instead of a library, but there we are. That's just how life is at the moment, isn't it? But what's great about it is that lots of you have been able to join us. If you're interested, we do have, although all libraries are shut at the moment, we do have access to all our e-resources. So we've got e-books, e-magazines, e-newspapers, audio, all available from our website. And some libraries in Nottingham City are open for click and collect. And we do have quite a huge range of non-fiction, certainly science books, and other interesting books about cats and that kind of thing. So if you'd like to follow up this talk with any kind of extra information, please do have a look on our website, and please do use our click and collect service. I'll put the link to the website in the chat function towards the end of the talk, if that's okay, Rick. And yeah, please enjoy the session. I'm really interested to find out why my cat eats fish. My cat's disappeared outside. She's braved the outside world for the first time in about 4 days. So I'm sure she'll be at the door wowing now to come back in while I'm in here. So, okay, thank you very much and enjoy yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Well, now, without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. David Gardner, who, as I said, is a professor of physiology in the University of Nottingham. And David, we're all eager to know, why do cats eat fish?
Okay, well, thanks, Rick. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to the Nottingham Festival of Science and Curiosity for inviting me to talk about an element of one avenues of research that I do. So my name's David, I'm a scientist, and I generally look at how bodies work. That's what physiology is. And a part of that led me, I probably focus on how our kidneys work. And that's what led me to this particular sort of avenue of research. Now, given we're in a festival of science and curiosity, I'm going to present some science, and it doesn't matter if you don't quite understand all of it, but hopefully you'll get the gist of it. I'm going to present in it sort of like, see it as a story of how scientists both think about things and use their curiosity to drive sort of research questions and trying to answer them. And the one question I'm going to present today is, why do cats eat fish? Or alternatively, why do we feed them fish? So I've been at Nottingham Vet School since 2006, at Nottingham since 2002. And clearly we do quite a bit of research in companion animal medicine with various partners around Nottingham. Okay, so for no further ado, let me click this and then my slides go on. And for most of us, and some of you in the audience perhaps, you'll see cartoons, and where you see a sort of a media or cartoon representation of a cat, you will nearly always see them next to a carcass of a fish. And it's almost become, you know, normal to see that. And we normally assume that cats eat fish and they like them. And so a part of this is hopefully I'll pique your curiosity as to why is this? Why do you think this is? Do you think that an evolution of cats, we hear about the evolution of humans quite a lot, do you think they evolved eating fish? Would that be normal for their sort of diet? And then we'll go on to, well, right, So what if they do? What's the downside to it? If they like it, so what? Have we got to worry about it? Probably not, but at least science might hopefully make you think about it. So turn on, tune in, and find out. So if I'd asked Rick, if we just ask, I can't actually see how many people are in the audience exactly, but on the poll, Rick, did you say you could run it in Zoom? And I'd just like, how many of you actually own a cat? And if that's come up, if you're able to click, we'll just get an idea. Maybe we're preaching to a converted audience and you all own cats. I don't own a cat because I'm allergic to them. But if it comes up, click and we'll just have a look.
The poll is running now, David, and so far we've got 87% voted, and I will share the results in just a second. I'll run it, I'll keep the poll open for a few more. And now I think everybody in the audience has voted. So I'll end the poll. And now I will share the results.
So, okay, that's mildly interesting, relative. So most of you own a cat. Okay. So the next question would be, if you own a cat and you know what your cat likes to eat, how often do you, so a simple question, do you feed or would you buy foodstuffs where they're branded as having fish in? How many of you do that? So of the people that own cats, when you feed your cat, do you often buy them food that is branded as fish?
Okay, let's launch that poll and let's see what results we get.
I'm going to click yes. It's more of interest, and I'll show you results of a poll that we did as well.
I think we've probably got the result because we've got the same percentage of people responding as indeed owned cats. So let's end that poll and share results.
Yeah, almost. So yeah, so the majority are yes. It is. Let me click that. So that goes on. We did a survey with a PhD student, and we put out a survey to cat owners asking them, what do you feed your cat? There's a trend nowadays to feed different things, or do you rely on them? Are they a farm cat and just rely on them catching rabbits and things? Most of them feed commercial diet. The biggest percentage of this pie chart is 85% feed a commercial diet, and of those own a cat. This graph shows that a big percentage, slightly more than half, fed at least some part or half of that diet as fish. So we asked them, what proportion of your diet is fish flavored? 14 people responded that all of it was. So they only feed them a fish-based diet. Another 43 said it would be more than half of their daily diet as such, or weekly. And then another 155 of the total, of which there are around 500, said, oh yeah, it's more than half the time we feed fish, which is not dissimilar to a mini poll that we've done of you out there. So it's fairly, I think we're fairly safe to say that people that own cats quite often feed them fish. Fine. So now I just want you to think about that. And we all know what that is, a cow. So if I say a cow is a herbivore, all of you will probably know, and you can't actually because we've muted though, but if I said, what is that? You'll say a dog. But if I asked you, what would you call a dog in terms of it? Is it a herbivore? It's an omnivore, which means it eats plants and animals. It's able to eat and digest plants and animals. We all know a lion, and what they are obviously carnivores. So we come to our little domestic cat, which we don't often associate as being like a lion, but in a sense, it is our friendly household lion. It's a carnivore too. So if you ask the majority of people where our domestic cat came from, probably most people would at least put 2 and 2 together and say, well, they're evolved from, they said domestic cat, and these are large cats, and essentially they're evolved from the same thing, and that would be true. And where do these large cats live? They live in this type of environment, a savanna, or a sort of a, not a desert as such, but a desert with bits of water. And I would say there aren't many fish there, are there? I don't see, although they might, these lions catching many fish as their main source of food. You think, well, so what? I mean, okay, so they haven't, so they've evolved, so our domestic cat has evolved in the savannah. It's unlikely that they evolved eating or relying upon fish as a sort of, as a source of food. So hold that thought. And the next thing I'm going to say is, when we think about evolution of cats versus our other domestic pals, dogs, we've got a chart here. I'm not sure how clearly you can see it. It's quite small on my laptop screen, but we've got dogs here, and dogs have evolved from wolves. And you can sort of trace back their lineage of dogs to wolf, and they come back here and they branch off and they branch here. And essentially, dogs have sort of, we know that there's a huge variation in the types of dog, breeds of dog, the shapes and sizes. They're fairly highly evolved, our domestic dog, relative to a wolf, even though they have evolved from a wolf. Domestic dogs have sort of become adapted to domestication. So they became specialized, and you know, a dachshund is very different from like an Irish wolfhound. There are lots of different species. When we look at the cat, and geneticists look at the sort of history, the evolutionary lineage of cats, they're not that highly evolved away from their wild sort of lion parents, as it were. There's only very few changes. Clearly they're smaller and slightly fluffier, etc. But they are very similar. When you genetically compare a domestic cat with a large cat living in the savannah, they're very similar as compared to dog and wolf. They haven't particularly evolved that many specialized differences that make them more amenable to domestication. Some of which they have, but others, but majority is they're very similar. So essentially what we've got in your domestic cat, your household cat, is a sort of a household lion. And that's one way of thinking about it. Okay, they've retained many similarities from what they have evolved from. Okay, so what? Now, the way to think about this is what happens when a given biological function is not needed anymore. And the best way of illustrating this, I guess, for most of you, all you humans out there, you'll know that you've got an appendix. And in us, that appendix is very small. Why is that? Because essentially it's said to be our vestigial cecum. Okay, and a cecum is a part of your large intestine that's useful for digesting plant matter. So when you look at the cecum of a horse, it's humongous. It takes up lots of its abdominal cavity because, of course, horses are grazing all day, and it helps digest all that indigestible matter that's in grass, lignin and things. So horses' cecum is huge because they use it a lot, and our cecum is very small because we hardly ever use it. So through evolution, you tend to lose functions that you don't use. And so, you know, in a sense, what I'm getting at is for cats that were only carnivores, live on savanna and used to eat animals, that's essentially what they're used to. They're certainly not used to anything else but that diet, because it would be a waste of energy maintaining functions that you don't use anymore. And that's how evolution streamlines things. So for cats, we talk of them as being obligate carnivore. they're obligated to be a carnivore. And nutritionally, what that means is they would never eat plants or plant matter as part of a normal diet, because their bodies have adapted to getting all of their nutrients from eating other animals, from eating the muscles and the fat and the organs and things like that. Rarely, because of that environment in which they've evolved from, like the lions, would rarely include eating fish. So they tend to have lost an ability to metabolize and digest lots of things that we might find in fish, because it was never a part of the diet. Why retain that ability? Whereas omnivores do, like dogs. So when manufacturers make diets, they have to bear this in mind, okay? Because these good quality diets that I illustrate here are said to be complete. And we now know quite a lot for animals about every nutrient that they need. And cats have very specific requirements for this very reason. They normally get lots of these amino acids that make up proteins from eating other animals like taurine and arginine. But because we're giving them this sort of dried kibble, the manufacturers have to make sure there's enough in there with a bit extra in order to make up a complete diet for cats. And equally, cats have lost ability to metabolize certain or make certain fatty acids in their body, because they're used to getting them from eating animals and eating animal fat, for example. And so they're added in to commercial foods. All of these things are high in animal tissues. Okay, so coming back to it, yeah, cats are often portrayed eating fish, and we know that lots of commercial foods, as you have sort of told me, you feed lots of commercial feeds with fish in. But fish are a very different type of food source. They have a different sort of nutritional composition. They can be high in iodine, for example. Fish might eat lots of organic matter in the sea, and it can build up through the food chain. So they can be really high in iodine, and it so happens, although I'm not suggesting there's a link between them, but it's of interest that cats get a high proportion of what's called hyperthyroidism, i.e. problems with their thyroid gland. Equally, fish can be high in a mineral, a metal that's bad for us, and our bodies don't like it, called arsenic. And generally that's from industrial runoff that goes into the sea eventually, and it gets into microorganisms in the sea that fish eat, and it builds up in the food chain. And when measured, fish can be very high in arsenic. And in countries that have a high arsenic in their environments, like Bangladesh, there's a very high rate of chronic kidney disease, which is where my original interest comes in. Okay, so this is sort of of interest to me. And so we looked into that, for example, and this is a very long-winded title. So kidney accumulation of pro-oxidant mineral elements, i.e. arsenic, and chronic kidney disease in the domestic cat. We thought we would look into this, and we asked that question: does arsenic, because cats are fed fish and they wouldn't normally get it, could it build up in their kidneys and give them or cause or be associated with chronic kidney disease in cats? And this is a graph which you don't need to take it all in. And here we're measuring on the y-axis kidney arsenic concentration. And here in the blue, we've got levels in dogs, canine, and all of these red ones, levels in cats. And you'll see on average, they look a little bit higher, but they're not hugely higher. Yes, it is higher in cats, in their kidneys, but it's certainly not much higher in cats with kidney disease, etc. And we also did some wild cats that have never lived in a house, and it didn't appear to be, it was down a bit relative to domestic. The point is there was a very small biological effect, but probably not of interest and probably not causing kidney disease. And a part of that work led us to consider that all of these complete foods that pet food manufacturers put out there, if I asked you how many of you look at the labels and how do you know what we know to be a complete diet, what are the levels like. Not many people actually do that and would know. So we thought we would do a random sampling of hundreds of diets bought from shops local to here and pet food supermarkets and things like that, and see how compliant they were with the existing legislation that's out there governed by the EU. And overall, we've got two pie charts here, and green is good. And so on the right, you'll see in dry foods, like we're in that bad dry kibble, the majority of them were very compliant. And of the wet foods, like in tins, there were some that were very non-compliant. And ultimately, we found that lots of them didn't meet all of the guidelines for various things in food. So we trust that they're all legally, some of them, very few, weren't compliant with any of the guidelines, and yet you could go out and buy them. And so we found this to be of interest. And so an inherent trust of the general public to go and buy a pet food, you assume it's all brilliant, and some of them weren't so brilliant. Well, is this a bad thing? Maybe not. Maybe it's not too bad, but it's of interest to scientists as to when foods are on the label and they have a guaranteed analysis, they're telling us what's in it. For example, here it has crude protein, how much protein and fat and fiber, and how many minerals are in it. And none of us probably look at these when you feed your pet, but actually getting into the details of it is actually quite interesting. Because here we'll see, this is how to read a label, that the first thing listed is probably the thing in highest concentration making up that feed. Here, ground yellow corn and chicken byproduct, and chicken, ground yellow corn, chicken byproduct, meal, whatever that is, corn, gluten, etc. Some of these things you never even know what exactly they are. So commercial refined feeds have lots of other stuff in them that we're not quite sure what they are, but they're very different to actually a cat catching a buffalo or whatever it might be and eating it. That would be a sort of a raw food, etc. And we know that fish muscle has lots of protein in it and lots of fat within the muscle. We also know that fish oils, you might hear about omega-3 oils, and they're said to be good for you and reduce heart disease and things like that. And they are good. And actually, when you give just fish oils to cats, it helps extend their life. But how do you know what's in a feed? And how do you know when it says crude fat, where is that fat from? Because they don't have to report that. And generally, you don't know. So we were sort of quite interested in this because starting with the question as to why do we feed, we know that lots of people feed cats fish, and we know that fish has lots of oil in it, and equally lots of other things that necessarily cats wouldn't normally get in their natural diet. So what we did was we extracted out all of the fat from kidney tissue. And the vet school has a pathology department, and often cats, for various reasons, have to be put down in our associated vet practices, whether that's old age or they've been hit by a car and, you know, beyond repairing, etc. And we got consent from the owners of those cats to have a look, grab a bit of kidney tissue and have a look what's in it. And so we extracted fat by using lots of centrifuges and spinning, and fat tends to sit on top of water. If you'll ever washed up a fatty dish, you'll see the fat all sitting on top in globules. And so you can use methods to extract out fat and then see what it's made of. And this is how you stain for fat. And on the left here, in the blue, is a dog kidney, and fat stains red. Down on the bottom right here is fat tissue, and you'll see there's lots of red sort of globules there. And up here is a cat kidney tissue stained for fat, and you'll see there's a lot more than in a dog. So cats have lots of fat in their kidneys, and that's a really unusual finding. You don't tend to see that in dog, as in here, or in humans. And so we then took out that fat and looked to see what it was made of. For example, is it made of the types of fat you see in fish? Well, actually, what we did here is, this is a sort of a photo. And what you do is you put a blob of that fat at the top here, where these big solid lines are, and then you put it into a solvent, i.e. it dissolves into it, and it runs up a plate. And then it helps separate out all of the different types of fat. So we've got like fatty acids, or triacylglycerols, or sort of sterol esters. Okay, and what we see on the bottom, we've got a dog, and we've got lots of cat samples, and we've got a wild cat. What we found was that you see a big white blob here. And so these are all cats, and they've got lots of sort of white blob there, and one further up, whereas the dog has a little bit there and hardly any. And the wild cat equally has some fat there. There's another dog, and you'll see there's a big blob missing there. And so what we've done is identify a band of unknown fat in lots of randomly chosen cat kidneys. And it's like, okay, we know that cats get a lot of chronic kidney disease as they age. We know that we feed them a refined diet that's got lots of things in that they wouldn't necessarily get as wild cats. Here's a wild cat, and it has very little in there. This is actually starting to be quite interesting. And actually, you don't need to remember any of these things, but we could then scrape away that band from this particular type of plate, and we could run it through fancy machines called mass spectrometers. And that will tell us exactly the types of fat based on their mass that are in there. And we discovered there are lots of what are called MADAGs and BCFAs. These are branched chain fatty acids, and these are monoalkyl diacylglycerides. Bit of a mouthful. To be honest, I had never heard of them until a year ago, and the plant biologist knew about them because you see lots of them in plants, and that's very weird. And there's hardly any reported evidence in the scientific literature on these sort of things being in mammals. And yet here we are. We've taken some cat kidneys, were put down for old age, lived in a house with a lady for all of their life. Yet here they are with loads of them in their kidneys, and this is really unusual. So these are the mass spectra that we get. And you see cat, dog, wild cat, and you see here there's barely anything going on in dog, and there's a big peak of stuff in the cat here. And you think, oh, what are those? This is looking interesting. And actually, when you focus in on all those types of fats that are there, we see these triacylglycerides and what are called MADAGs being in high proportion. The peaks are bigger, against hardly any in a wild cat and hardly any in a dog. So the fact is, wild cats don't eat commercial diet, and the domestic cats do. Dogs eat commercial diet, but they have hardly any. So there's something about the environment of a domestic cat and being a cat that is causing these to accumulate. Maybe accumulation of these things in cats' kidneys might underlie some of the predisposition to chronic kidney disease in cats. Ultimately, that's where we're sort of, hasn't been published or anything yet, we're still investigating it. So, why do we feed cats fish? Because they like it. We know they like the taste and the smell of fish. Fish oils are actually good for cats. They can extend their life. But equally, lots of things in the commercial diets that we buy, and we don't look at the labels, can be a fairly cheap byproduct, like plant oils, like palm oil, etc., is incorporated into lots of things because it is a fat and it has high energy, so it can be incorporated into lots of diets because it's cheaper to do. So should we feed cats fish? I would say everything in moderation. I definitely wouldn't entirely feed it, but if they like it every now and then, it's probably going to be fine. Fish oil is fine. Maybe cheaper sources, and if pet foods look like they've got lots of plants in, wheat or other such things, it's maybe not such a high quality diet for a cat. But essentially, I hope this has sort of shown how curiosity, asking research questions, is driving science. And we're basically challenging pet food companies about what they put in their foods. And I always think that's probably a good thing to do. And we're certainly not saying they're all bad. We're just probably challenging the status quo. Because hopefully, if we do actually find a direct cause, we can simply say, and actually a lot of this research was funded by a pet food company, we can, say, if we know what these types of fats are and we know where they come from, you can just switch how you make up diets and stop including them. And that's where we are about it at the moment. Okay, so I'll stop screen sharing, and if you want me to go over a slide or go back, but got questions, then feel free. So I can. Do you want me to go through?
Yes, thanks, David. That's absolutely fascinating. And yeah, you can see that the questions are already coming in.
Yeah, so I'll start from the top and I'll work down on the ones in the chat. So Yvonne has asked, from the research you've conducted, did any cat food product come out on top as giving your cat all of their required nutrients? What I would say to that is, in actual, we did about 200. I should look at I'm going to move this down here because then I actually look at the camera. We did about 200 dog and cat foods. And actually, we looked at really expensive ones, like the image I showed you, the Science Plans and the Royal Canin. And we looked at standard ones and then supermarket own brand. And for definite, and our hypothesis going in that was that maybe the cheaper supermarket own brand wouldn't be as good with regard to meeting all of the guidelines. And that wasn't the case. They were just as good. And yes, there were some offenders. And I definitely, if we're recording, I'm not going to name them, because actually when we published that, we had the Pet Food Manufacturers Association onto our backs. And the BBC ran a programme called Trust Me, I'm a Vet. And we actually sort of featured some of the work in one of the programmes. And we got a lot of flack about it. It was mainly about raw foods and things, but for sure, it wasn't better quality. Known brands were generally pretty good. There were a few offenders, and that was down to a couple of companies that I wouldn't have as much faith in. But the majority, overwhelming majority, were very good, I would say.
Thanks, David. Now, there was an interesting question from Isabel, who's starting to introduce insect-based protein to her cat's diet.
Yeah.
What's your view about insect protein?
Yeah, I mean, so I wrote something on that actually, because I got asked about it, because in other countries and in England, people are starting to use insects as a cheaper source of protein, because they reproduce very fast and the actual biological mass can increase very quickly. And so if the Conversation UK is a website and they publish things, and we actually wrote something, so have a look, it's freely available for the public. And the view was, yeah, it could be a source of protein for pet foods, but in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, etc., it's actually quite expensive. You have to heat the insects. They have to be kept at a high temperature in order to grow well. And equally, we're not quite sure about insect biology and what other metabolites that they might have that animals will be unused to. And that, to an extent, is at the back of my mind. but it's certainly one in which lots of companies are looking at. In terms of the overall production, the greenness of it, is it better than a cow, for example, using byproducts from a cow? Probably in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but it's not as good as you imagine because they have to be kept in highly controlled, higher temperature conditions. But it's a novel one. There are regulations about what goes into diets and they have to be validated and checked independently. And so in general, that validation is a good thing, but I always think it's good for independent scientists like ourselves to challenge the status quo and just see if people are doing what they should be doing. So there are questions about...
I don't know whether you want to go into a rather more controversial question or comment that came in from Sarah, who said, cats don't evolve. What's your thoughts about that?
Cats don't evolve? Not true. Everything is evolving, and it's such a slow process that it's hard to see it. But you can speed up evolution by looking at bacteria, or indeed everyone these days is a virologist in a lab looking at viruses, and they can show you evolution in front of your eyes because their speed of replication is so quick. And so they are evolving in different ways, and it may just be that we haven't looked at the ways in which they are, and therefore the evidence isn't there. But it's very true to say, as I was saying in the slides early on, that they are less well evolved. Dogs, as part of being our domestic companions, clearly offered an advantage to us. Sleigh dogs or hunting dogs or guard dogs. And so they have probably been domesticated longer. Whereas what cats probably are, and most cat owners, and I'm not one, would probably say that cats are pretty independent creatures, do what they like, and don't necessarily like being around humans all of the time. They just go off and do their own thing. So they probably evolved or became domestic simply because it got easier to get food, as opposed to them actually offering a benefit to humans. And so there's probably been a lot less evolution in the domestic cat because there's been a lot less time that cats have evolved alongside humans.
Okay, thank you. Now, we've only got really a few moments left. Isabel has commented that her cat actually does catch and eat flies and spiders. So Isabel's cat is already getting a little bit of an insect diet. But I think is a final comment and question, David. What would be your kind of best advice about diet and food for pet owners, cat owners? There's a lot of questions about dry food, wet food, food that's wrapped in plastic, and so on. What's your kind of concluding comment about the diet and food for cats?
Everything in moderation. Buy the best diet you can afford and your cat likes, and vary it by brand and main food type, i.e. is it beef or lamb, or what is it in? Vary it, and don't stick to just fish or just beef or the same brand forever. If you find a lot of people find one they like and their cat eats it and everyone's happy, it's probably not normal to just eat the same thing day after day after day after day. I think it might be better to vary things a little bit. And dogs can probably get around it. Cats maybe supplement by going and catching mice and various other things, but if they're confined to a flat in a tower block or something, maybe that's not available to them. But that can probably get around things. So I would say vary it, add a bit of wet and dry together, feed them according to weight, and change the products every now and then to ones they like. There's no one size fits all, and there's no one best diet.
No, thank you. Well, now look, I think we've just got time to invite everybody who may be who's got their cat on their laps or in front of the screen to put their videos on. Oh, let's if you're willing to, members of our audience, put your videos on and let's see how many cats we can put on screen.
They're all trying to find their cats now.
They're all oh, there's Isabel's rather large, yes.
The cats aren't impressed.
Any more for any more? Any more cats coming on? Yes.
Mine's fast asleep.
Joanne's is on the windowsill. Eilish has put up. Yes, this looks rather beautiful.
Cats were made for the internet.
Yeah,
funny
absolutely.
videos are the best
I was very pleased, David, that neither of us decided to use the cat filter in making this presentation.
Yesterday's viral video.
Absolutely. Well,
well, if you've got questions, yeah, just ask. But anyway,
we're just out of time.
Yeah, no problem.
So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, can I first of all say a big thank you? Oh, Eilish, lovely.
They're wondering what's going on.
Well, can I just say a big thank you to Dr. David Gardner for his fascinating talk this morning about his research into cats. I'd like to again thank Sandra Edis and the Nottingham City Libraries Service for being our partners in the Festival of Science and Curiosity. I'd like to say a huge thank you to all our audience and a special thank you to the cats. Thanks for joining us. Tune in for future talks and see you again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye.